The harsh whistle of the westbound train faded into the distance as Molly Walker clutched her younger sister's trembling hand, their entire lives packed into a single battered valise. At just 19, Molly had become the sole guardian of 8-year-old Eliza after a swift and merciless fever had claimed their parents back in Philadelphia. Standing on the dusty platform of Silver Creek, Colorado, in the summer of 1878, Molly stared at the rugged landscape stretching before them, her letter of employment at the town's schoolhouse feeling impossibly thin against the weight of her responsibilities. "Are we home now, Molly?" Eliza's small voice quavered as she pressed closer to her sister's skirts, her once vibrant blue eyes dulled by weeks of grief. "Not yet, sweetheart," Molly replied, smoothing down Eliza's golden curls so like their mother's. "But we will be soon. The school board secretary should be meeting us here." The platform had emptied quickly, leaving the sisters alone as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Molly's throat tightened with anxiety. Their funds were depleted from the journey west, and the promised lodging arrangements seemed increasingly uncertain with each passing minute. "Miss Walker, I presume?" A stern voice called from behind them. Molly turned to find a pinch-faced woman in a severe black dress approaching. "Yes, I'm Molly Walker, Martha Grigsby, school board secretary." The woman's eyes narrowed as they fell on Eliza. "I wasn't informed you'd be bringing family." Molly's spine stiffened. "My sister was mentioned in my correspondence. Our parents recently passed and she's in my care now, Mrs." Grigsby's lips pursed disapprovingly. "The teaching position was meant for a single woman. The accommodation is barely suitable for one, let alone a child. This simply won't do." "But we've come all this way," Molly protested, panic rising in her chest. "I have the contract letter here, which clearly states subject to final approval upon arrival. I'm afraid the board will need to reconsider." Mrs. Grigsby turned on her heel. "The stage returns eastbound tomorrow morning. Good day, Miss Walker." Molly stood frozen, her sister's hand clutching hers painfully tight as Mrs. Grigsby disappeared down the street. Around them, the unfamiliar frontier town bustled with activity miners, cowboys, and townspeople going about their business, none sparing a glance for the two stranded girls. "Molly." Eliza's voice quavered. "What are we going to do?" Fighting back tears, Molly knelt before her sister. "We'll figure something out. We always do, don't we, together?" The sisters spent what little money remained on a room at the cheapest boarding house. They could find a dilapidated establishment that smelled of stale tobacco and unwashed bodies. As Eliza finally fell into an exhausted sleep on the sagging mattress, Molly sat by the window, watching the lamplight flicker across the main street of what was supposed to be their new beginning. By morning, she had a plan, threadbare though it was. After inquiring with the boarding house proprietress, Molly learned that the Silver Creek saloon was seeking help. With Eliza in tow, they made their way to the establishment, where Molly swallowed her pride and asked for work. "I need a girl to serve drinks and look pretty," the owner, a gruff man named Baxter, said skeptically as he eyed Molly's modest attire. "Not to bring a child along." "I can work harder than any two girls," Molly insisted, desperation edging her voice. "And Eliza is quiet, she won't be any trouble." Baxter scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Got a back room needs organizing. Kid can stay there during your shifts. Pays $3 a week, not a penny more. You start tonight." It wasn't teaching, but it would keep them fed. For 3 weeks, Molly served drinks to miners and cowboys, dodging wandering hands and leering gazes, while Eliza spent hours alone in the dusty storage room, entertaining herself with a tattered book of fairy tales they'd brought from home. The arrangement grew more precarious with each passing day. The saloon was no place for either of them, but especially not for a child. Baxter's patience with Eliza's presence was wearing thin, and the leers from customers were becoming more insistent. On a particularly busy Saturday night, Molly was rushing between tables when a drunken miner grabbed her wrist, pulling her roughly onto his lap. "Come on, teacher lady," he slurred, his whiskey breath hot against her face. "Show me what you've been teaching those young'uns." "Release me at once," Molly demanded, struggling against his grip. "Let the lady go." The deep voice cut through the saloon's din like a knife. The miner's hold loosened as he looked up, his face paling. "Ain't looking for trouble, Kincaid? Then you found the wrong lap to put your hands on." Molly stumbled to her feet and found herself looking way up at a tall, broad-shouldered man with eyes the color of a summer storm. His face was weathered by sun and wind, and a jagged scar ran along his jawline. Yet there was something undeniably gentle in his gaze as it settled on her. "You all right, miss?" he asked. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Kincaid, Knox Kincaid." He tipped his hat slightly. "Don't believe I've seen you in Silver Creek before." Before Molly could respond, a small voice called from the back room. "Molly." Eliza stood in the doorway, her small face drawn with fear as she took in the crowded saloon. "Eliza, go back to the room," Molly urged, hurrying toward her sister. "Well now, what's this?" Baxter appeared, his face flushed with anger. "I told you to keep that kid out of sight." "This ain't no orphanage, I'm sorry," Molly began, placing herself between Baxter and Eliza. "She was frightened. I don't care if she's dying of fright. Get her out of my establishment or both of you can find somewhere else to be," Baxter roared. The saloon fell silent, all eyes on the confrontation. Molly felt Eliza trembling against her skirts, clinging to her with desperate fingers. "Now, Baxter," Knox Kincaid's voice carried across the room as he stepped forward. "That's no way to speak to a lady. Mind your business, Kincaid. These two ain't your concern." Knox's gaze shifted from Baxter to Molly and Eliza, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Maybe they should be," he said quietly. Then, louder, "Miss, gather your things. You and the little one are coming with me. I beg your pardon." Molly stared at him, caught between fear and desperate hope. "My ranch needs a housekeeper," Knox stated simply. "Pays better than pouring drinks for handsy miners, and it's no place for a child to be cooped up in a storage room." Baxter snorted. "Since when do you need a housekeeper?" "You barely need that cabin you call a house." Knox ignored him, his eyes fixed on Molly. "It's your choice, miss, but the offer stands." Molly hesitated only briefly. The stranger before her was just that, a stranger. But Eliza's fingers dug into her skirt and Baxter's face promised nothing but more trouble. Sometimes survival meant taking chances. "We accept, Mr. Kincaid," she said firmly, feeling Eliza press closer to her side. Within 20 minutes, they had gathered their meager belongings and were seated in Knox Kincaid's wagon, rumbling away from Silver Creek under a canopy of stars. Eliza had fallen asleep almost immediately, exhaustion claiming her as she leaned against Molly's side. "Why are you helping us?" Molly finally asked, her voice barely audible over the creak of wagon wheels. Knox kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Everyone deserves a fair chance, Miss Walker. Seems to me you two haven't had yours yet. You don't know anything about us. I know enough." He glanced sideways at her. "I know you're desperate enough to work in Baxter's saloon, but proud enough to keep your back straight while doing it. I know that little girl looks at you like you hung the moon, and I know Silver Creek would chew you both up and spit you out before winter." His bluntness was oddly comforting. "I was supposed to be the new schoolteacher," Molly admitted, "but they wouldn't take me with Eliza." Knox nodded as if this confirmed something for him. "Their loss. My gain, I reckon." They rode in silence for nearly an hour before the outline of a ranch house appeared against the starlit horizon. It wasn't large, but it was solid, a main house built of sturdy logs with a wide porch, a barn, and several outbuildings scattered nearby. As they drew closer, Molly could see a corral with several horses moving like shadows in the darkness. "It's not much," Knox said as he brought the wagon to a stop, "but it's quiet, safe." "It's wonderful," Molly whispered, meaning it. After weeks of uncertainty, even this remote cabin felt like sanctuary. Knox carried the still sleeping Eliza inside while Molly followed with their valise. The interior was simple but clean: a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area, and 2 doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. You and your sister can take the back room, Knox said, gently placing Eliza on the bed. I'll bunk in the barn tonight. Tomorrow we'll sort out proper arrangements. Mr. Kincaid, I can't possibly Knox, he corrected her. And yes, you can. Get some rest, Miss Walker. Morning comes early on a ranch. Before she could protest further, he was gone, closing the front door softly behind him. Molly stood in the unfamiliar room, listening to Eliza's steady breathing, and for the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she allowed herself to feel something like hope. Morning arrived with golden light spilling through the windows and the aroma of coffee filling the small house. Molly woke to find Eliza's side of the bed empty and bolted upright in panic. Rushing into the main room, she stopped short at the sight before her. Knox Kincaid sat at the rough-hewn table, his large frame making the furniture seem diminutive. Across from him, Eliza perched on a chair, her legs swinging freely as she carefully sipped from a tin cup. Morning, Knox nodded toward Molly. Coffee's hot. There's biscuits keeping warm by the stove. Molly, Eliza's face brightened. Mr. Knox showed me the horses. He says I can help feed the chickens if it's all right with you. Stunned by her sister's animation, the most life she'd shown since their parents passing, Molly could only nod. That would be fine if Mr. Kincaid doesn't mind. Told you it's just Knox, he reminded her, rising to pour coffee into another cup. And I'd welcome the help. Ranch is too quiet these days. Over breakfast, Knox explained the workings of the Broken Spur Ranch. It was modest by Colorado standards, 80 acres, 30 head of cattle, a small horse breeding operation, and enough crops to be mostly self-sufficient. He'd built it from nothing after returning from the war, working alone save for occasional help from neighboring ranchers. What I'm offering is fair, he said as they finished eating. Room and board for both of you, plus $30 a month for your work, Miss Walker. The house needs tending, meals need cooking, and I won't pretend I've done either particularly well on my own. It was a generous arrangement, far better than anything Molly could have hoped for in Silver Creek, yet something nagged at her. Why are you doing this, Mr. Knox? You don't know us. We could be anyone. Knox's weathered face softened slightly. I know what it's like to be alone in the world with responsibilities too heavy to bear. His gaze drifted to Eliza, who was watching a pair of bluebirds through the window. Sometimes folks need a hand up, not judgment. There was a story there, Molly could sense it, but Knox's expression closed like a book snapped shut. Now, if you're staying, there's work to be done. If not, I can take you back to town. Molly looked at Eliza, seeing the spark of interest that had been missing for so long, then back at Knox Kincaid with his scarred face and guarded eyes. We're staying, she decided. At least until we find our feet. Knox nodded once as if he'd expected nothing less. Good. I'll show you around then. The days that followed established a rhythm to their new life. Molly rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, then spent her mornings cleaning the long-neglected cabin, washing laundry that had clearly been attended to by someone with little skill or interest, and gradually bringing order to Knox's bachelor existence. Afternoons were devoted to tending the vegetable garden that had gone half wild and helping with whatever ranch chores Knox deemed appropriate for her. Eliza flourished in the open spaces of the Broken Spur. Knox taught her to collect eggs without disturbing the hens, and showed infinite patience as she trailed after him asking endless questions. To Molly's surprise, the taciturn rancher never seemed irritated by the child's presence, answering each query thoughtfully and often pointing out things he thought might interest her: a hummingbird's nest, a rabbit warren, the tracks of a coyote family that lived in the nearby hills. 2 weeks into their stay, Molly was hanging laundry when she heard Eliza's laughter, a sound so rare since their parents' death that it stopped her in her tracks. From around the barn came Knox, Eliza perched on his shoulders, both of them covered in dust and looking equally delighted with themselves. Molly, Mr. Knox showed me how to rope a fence post, Eliza called excitedly. I missed a lot, but then I got it once, did you now? Molly smiled, struck by the transformation in her sister. And did Mr. Knox also show you how to wash up before supper? Knox grinned, the expression transforming his stern features. That lesson comes next, he said, swinging Eliza down from his shoulders. Can't have your sister thinking we're complete savages out here. As Eliza raced to the water pump, Knox lingered, his expression growing serious. She's a quick study, smart as a whip. She is, Molly agreed, pride evident in her voice. Our father was a professor before he fell ill. He always said Eliza had his mind for learning. She should be in school. It wasn't a question but a statement of fact. Molly's hands stilled on the damp sheet she was hanging. Yes, she should. In Philadelphia, she was just starting her education. Silver Creek's got a schoolhouse. Not much of one, but it serves the purpose. The same school board that wouldn't hire me because of her. Molly couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Knox was quiet for a moment. Town's having a social next Saturday, raising money for school supplies. Might be a good chance to make some introductions. Let folks see you're not just a name on a letter. Why would that matter? The position's surely been filled by now. Maybe, maybe not, Knox shrugged. Either way, you two could use some socializing beyond an old warhorse like me. Consider it. Before Molly could respond, he strode off to help Eliza with the pump, leaving her with more questions than answers about the mysterious rancher who had so unexpectedly changed their fortunes. That night, after Eliza had fallen asleep, Molly sat by the fire mending one of Knox's shirts. The cabin was quiet save for the crackling of logs and the occasional creaking of the house settling. Knox sat across from her, whittling a small wooden horse that she suspected was meant for Eliza. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured, glancing up from her stitching. Knox's hands paused briefly before resuming their careful work. "You can ask, might not answer. You mentioned knowing what it's like to be alone with heavy responsibilities. What did you mean?" For a long moment she thought he might not respond. Then, without looking up from his carving, "Had a younger brother once. Parents died when he was just 7, me 18. Raised him best I could until the war came." Molly's hands stilled. "The Civil War," Knox nodded. "Enlisted with the Union in '63. Left Daniel with neighbors who promised to look after him. His knife made a particularly forceful cut into the wood. Came back in '65 to find him gone. Neighbors said he ran off after hearing I'd been killed at Gettysburg. But you weren't. Wounded, captured. Spent 8 months in a Confederate prison camp before being exchanged." His voice was matter of fact, but Molly could sense the pain beneath the words. "By the time I got home, the trail was cold. Spent 3 years searching every orphanage and boys' home east of the Mississippi." "Did you ever find him?" Molly asked softly. Knox shook his head, finally meeting her gaze. "No, he'd be 22 now if he's alive. I came west when I ran out of places to look. Built this place, thinking maybe someday he'd hear about a Knox Kincaid in Colorado territory and know where to find me." The weight of his loss hung in the air between them. Molly understood then why he'd been so quick to offer them sanctuary, why the sight of a young girl clinging to her older sister had moved him to action. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It was a long time ago." Knox returned to his whittling, but his next words belied his dismissive tone. "When I saw you two at the saloon, you holding on to your sister like she might disappear if you let go, it reminded me of things I should have done differently." "You were just a boy yourself," Molly said gently, "old enough to know better." He set down his knife, examining the small wooden horse critically. "Anyway, that's why. Mystery solved?" Molly wanted to say more, to offer some comfort for a wound that clearly hadn't healed, but Knox stood abruptly, placing the carved horse on the mantel. "Got an early start tomorrow. Driving some horses to the McKinnon place." He nodded toward her mending. "Don't stay up too late on my account." After he'd gone to his room, Molly remained by the fire, his story turning over in her mind. The strong, capable man who had rescued them carried his own burden of loss and regret. Perhaps, she thought, they weren't so different after all. The town social arrived warm and clear, with summer wildflowers dotting the prairie around Silver Creek. Knox had spent the morning unusually quiet, disappearing twice to the barn only to emerge looking dissatisfied. When he finally appeared dressed in his Sunday best, a clean shirt, vest, and a coat that looked as though it had rarely seen use, Molly was struck by the transformation. With his dark hair slicked back and his normally stubbled jaw freshly shaved, Knox Kincaid was a handsome man indeed. "You look very nice," she offered, feeling suddenly shy in the blue dress she'd carefully laundered for the occasion. Knox's ears reddened slightly. "As do you, Miss Walker." His eyes lingered on her for a moment before shifting to Eliza, who wore a ribbon Molly had fashioned from scraps of fabric. "Both of you, the folks in town won't know what hit them." The journey to Silver Creek was filled with Eliza's excited chatter about the prospect of ice cream, which Knox had mentioned was traditional at the summer social. Molly found herself watching him as he drove the wagon, noting the easy way he handled the horses and the gentle patience with which he answered Eliza's endless questions. In the 3 weeks they'd been at the Broken Spur, something had shifted between them, a comfortable familiarity that went beyond employer and employee. She'd come to appreciate his quiet strength, his unwavering fairness, and the way his rare smiles transformed his face. More than once, she'd caught herself watching him as he worked around the ranch, admiring the powerful set of his shoulders or the deftness of his hands. Such thoughts were dangerous, she reminded herself firmly. Their arrangement was temporary, a stepping stone, until she could secure a more suitable position. Allowing her heart to become entangled would only lead to disappointment. The town square had been transformed for the social, with tables laden with food, bunting hung between buildings, and a small band playing near the gazebo. Wagons and horses surrounded the area, indicating a good turnout from the surrounding ranches and homesteads. As they made their way through the crowd, Molly noticed how people greeted Knox with respect, certainly, but also a certain wariness, as if unsure where they stood with him. Knox nodded acknowledgments but kept moving, his hand occasionally coming to rest at the small of Molly's back as he guided her through particularly dense clusters of townspeople. "Knox Kincaid, as I live and breathe," a booming voice called out. "Didn't expect to see you here." A barrel-chested man with an impressive handlebar mustache approached, clapping Knox on the shoulder with enough force to stagger a lesser man. "McKinnon," Knox nodded. "Thought I'd show Miss Walker and her sister what passes for civilization around these parts." McKinnon's eyebrows shot up as he took in Molly and Eliza. "Miss Walker, is it? Pleasure to make your acquaintance." He glanced at Knox with undisguised curiosity. "Didn't know you had company at the Broken Spur." "Miss Walker is my housekeeper," Knox stated, his tone brooked no further questions. "And this is her sister, Miss Eliza." "Well now, any friend of Knox's is a friend of mine," McKinnon declared, bowing slightly to Molly. "Henry McKinnon, madam. My wife runs the general store and she'll be pleased as punch to meet you both." What followed was a whirlwind of introductions, as word spread of Knox Kincaid's mysterious houseguests. Molly found herself being assessed by curious glances and peppered with polite but probing questions about her background and how she'd come to the Broken Spur. Through it all, Knox remained a steady presence at her side, occasionally steering the conversation away from particularly intrusive inquiries. "Miss Walker was to be our new schoolteacher before that unfortunate misunderstanding," a familiar voice said, and Molly turned to find Mrs. Grigsby approaching, her pinched expression unchanged from their first meeting. "Mrs. Grigsby," Molly acknowledged stiffly. "I must say I'm surprised to see you still in Silver Creek," the older woman continued, "even more surprised at your current employment situation." Knox shifted slightly, placing himself more firmly between Molly and the school board secretary. "I'd say the misunderstanding was the school board's, madam. Miss Walker is an educated woman with a gift for teaching. My loss will be the town's gain when she eventually takes her rightful place at the schoolhouse." Mrs. Grigsby's eyes widened at Knox's direct challenge. "Mr. Kincaid, Surely you understand that the board had concerns about a devoted sister caring for an orphan child. No, madam, I don't understand that concern at all. Knox's voice remained level, but Molly could sense the steel beneath his polite tone. A tall, distinguished man in a fine suit approached the increasingly tense group. Martha, is everything all right? Judge Wilson, Mrs. Grigsby turned gratefully to the newcomer. I was just explaining to Mr. Kincaid why Miss Walker's situation made her unsuitable for our teaching position. Judge Wilson's keen eyes assessed the situation quickly. Ah, so this is the young lady from Philadelphia. A pleasure to meet you at last, Miss Walker. I've heard good things about your credentials. Thank you, sir, Molly replied, surprised by his warm greeting. I don't believe I've had the pleasure of meeting your sister, the judge continued, smiling kindly at Eliza, who had pressed herself against Molly's side as the adults conversed. This is Eliza, Molly said, gently encouraging her sister forward. She's 8 years old. A perfect age for school, Judge Wilson noted. Which reminds me, Martha, didn't Miss Hargrove telegraph yesterday to decline our offer? Something about accepting a position in Denver instead. Mrs. Grigsby's face flushed. Well, yes, but surely we can find another suitable candidate. Perhaps the suitable candidate has already found us, the judge interrupted smoothly, turning back to Molly. Miss Walker, if you're still interested in the position, I believe the board should reconsider your application. With proper accommodations for both you and your sister, of course. Molly felt Knox tense beside her. That's very kind, Judge Wilson, but Miss Walker is contracted at the Broken Spur through Harvest, Knox interjected. After that, we can discuss her future plans. Judge Wilson's eyebrows rose slightly at Knox's proprietary tone, but he nodded agreeably. Of course, no rush. The position will remain open until the right candidate is found. He tipped his hat to Molly. I hope you'll enjoy the social, Miss Walker. Perhaps we'll speak again before you leave. As the judge led Mrs. Grigsby away, Molly turned to Knox with confusion. Why did you say I was contracted through Harvest? We never discussed any such arrangement. Knox's jaw tightened. Gives you options. You can still take the teaching position if you want it, but on your terms, not theirs. And if I wanted to leave sooner? Something flashed in his eyes, hurt, perhaps, or disappointment before his expression shuddered. Then you'd leave. I'm not holding you prisoner, Molly. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way it sounded in his deep voice made her heart flutter. Before she could respond, Eliza tugged at her hand. Can I have ice cream now? Mr. Knox promised. The tension broke as Knox smiled down at the child. So I did, Miss Eliza. Let's see about finding you that ice cream. The remainder of the afternoon passed pleasantly, with Eliza delighting in the simple festivities while Molly found herself introduced to most of Silver Creek's prominent citizens. Many expressed interest in her teaching background, and several mothers with school-age children made a point of telling her how welcome she would be at the schoolhouse. As twilight approached and lanterns were lit around the square, the band struck up a waltz. Couples moved to the cleared area in front of the gazebo, and Molly watched with a wistful smile as they twirled beneath the emerging stars. May I have this dance? Knox's voice was low near her ear, sending an unexpected shiver down her spine. Oh. Yes, thank you, she stammered, glancing toward Eliza, who was happily engaged in a game of tag with several other children. Knox led her to the edge of the dancing area, one large hand coming to rest at her waist while the other gently clasped her fingers. Up close, she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair at the temples. I haven't danced in a very long time, she admitted as they began to move with the music. That makes two of us, Knox replied, guiding her smoothly despite his disclaimer. But some things you don't forget. They moved together in comfortable silence for several measures, Knox leading with unexpected grace for such a powerfully built man. Around them, other dancers cast curious glances their way, but Molly found she didn't care. For these few minutes, it was just the two of them, moving in harmony beneath the deepening twilight. "Did you mean what you said to Judge Wilson?" she finally asked. "About me staying until harvest?" Knox's eyes met hers, serious and searching. "I meant that you have choices, Molly. You and Eliza both. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. And what if?" She hesitated, gathering her courage. "What if I'm not sure what I want anymore?" His step faltered slightly before recovering. "Then you take the time you need to figure it out. The broken spur isn't going anywhere." "And its owner," she pressed, heart pounding. "Is he going anywhere?" Knox's hand tightened almost imperceptibly at her waist. "No," he said quietly. "He's found reasons to stay exactly where he is." The music ended before Molly could respond, and they separated as applause broke out around them. But something had changed between them, an acknowledgement of possibilities neither had dared to voice until now. As they gathered Eliza and prepared to return to the ranch, Molly found herself looking forward not to a potential future at the schoolhouse, but to the quiet cabin and the man who had made it feel like home. Summer faded into autumn at the broken spur, bringing with it golden days and cool nights. The harvest was good, the cattle fat, and the mood at the ranch one of quiet satisfaction. Molly had settled fully into her role, not just as housekeeper but as a true partner in the running of the ranch. Knox sought her opinion on matters both small and large, from which preserves to put up for winter to whether they should invest in expanding the horse breeding operation. Eliza attended the Silver Creek School 3 days a week, riding in with Knox when he had business in town and staying with the McKinnon's daughter, who had become a fast friend on those nights. The arrangement satisfied both her need for education and Molly's desire to keep her close. As for Molly herself, Judge Wilson had kept the teaching position open, making it clear that it was hers whenever she wished to claim it. But as autumn deepened toward winter, she found herself increasingly reluctant to leave the broken spur. It wasn't just the security of their situation, though that certainly played a part. It was the way Knox's eyes followed her across a room, the brush of his hand against hers when they worked side by side. The long conversations by the fire after Eliza was asleep, where they shared their hopes, fears, and memories. It was the growing certainty that what she felt for Knox Kincaid was something deeper and more profound than gratitude. On a crisp November afternoon, Molly was hanging the last of the season's laundry when she heard riders approaching. Knox had left at dawn to help a neighboring ranch with a difficult calving, so she wasn't expecting company. Shading her eyes against the low autumn sun, she watched as 2 men on horseback made their way up the long drive to the ranch house. As they drew closer, Molly recognized Judge Wilson. The other rider was a young man she didn't know, tall and lean, with a serious expression. Something about his posture struck her as familiar, though she couldn't place why. "Miss Walker," Judge Wilson called as they dismounted, "I hope we're not intruding." "Not at all, Judge," Molly replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Knox is away at the moment, but he should return before nightfall." "Actually, it's you we've come to see," the judge said, gesturing to his companion. "This young man arrived on today's train looking for information about Knox Kincaid. When he explained his purpose, I thought it best to bring him directly to the ranch." The young man stepped forward, removing his hat to reveal dark hair the same shade as Knox's. "Madam, my name is Daniel Kincaid. I'm looking for my brother." Molly's hand flew to her mouth, her heart racing. "Daniel, Knox's brother," the young man nodded, uncertainty and hope warring in his expression. "Yes, madam. I've been searching for him for years. Only recently learned he might be in Colorado." "He's alive then?" Judge Wilson asked, clearly as stunned by this revelation as Molly was. "Very much alive," Molly confirmed, joy bubbling up inside her. "And he's been searching for you too, Daniel, for a very long time." Daniel's composure cracked slightly, his eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. "I never stopped looking. After I heard he'd been killed at Gettysburg, I ran away to find his regiment, to learn where he was buried. By the time I discovered he'd survived, I'd been taken in by a family heading west. We lost touch with anyone who might have known where Knox ended up." He'll be back soon, Molly promised, reaching out to clasp Daniel's arm. Please come inside. There's someone else you should meet while we wait. The hours that followed were filled with Daniel sharing his story how he'd eventually made his way to California, working on ranches and saving money to fund his search for his brother. How a chance meeting with a cattle buyer who'd done business with Knox had finally given him the lead he needed. Eliza was fascinated by this unexpected visitor, who spoke of her beloved Mr. Knox as a young man telling stories of their childhood in Pennsylvania that painted a picture of Knox so different from the reserved rancher they knew. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when they heard the sound of a horse approaching at a gallop. Molly moved to the window, her heart racing as she saw Knox dismounting, his movements urgent. Judge Wilson must have been spotted on the road by one of the neighboring ranchers who'd mentioned his destination to Knox. Wait here, she told Daniel, who had gone suddenly pale. Let me prepare him. She stepped onto the porch just as Knox reached the bottom step, his face taut with concern. Molly, is everything all right? Henderson said Wilson came out here with a stranger. Everything's fine, she assured him, unable to contain her smile. Better than fine, actually. Knox, there's someone here to see you, someone who's been looking for you for a very long time. Confusion flickered across his features, quickly replaced by wary hope as understanding dawned. Molly, don't if this is some kind of mistake. The door opened behind her and Daniel stepped onto the porch. It's no mistake, Knox, it's me. For a moment, Knox stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the young man before him as if afraid he might disappear. Then, with a choked sound that might have been his brother's name, he surged forward, enveloping Daniel in an embrace so fierce it lifted the younger man off his feet. Molly slipped back inside, giving the brothers the privacy they deserved for their reunion. Through the window, she watched as they clung to each other, years of searching and longing culminating in this single, perfect moment. Judge Wilson discreetly mounted his horse and departed with a nod to Molly, understanding that his presence was no longer needed. Later that night, after a joyous dinner filled with stories and laughter, after Eliza had reluctantly gone to bed with promises of more tales in the morning, after Daniel had retired to the spare room that had once been Eliza's before she'd moved into Molly's larger bedroom, Molly and Knox sat alone by the fire. I can't believe he's really here, Knox said softly, his eyes still bearing the stunned look of a man who had received a miracle he'd stopped believing in. All these years I thought, I know. Molly reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. I'm so happy for you, Knox. He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face, his expression suddenly vulnerable. This changes things. How so? Daniel will stay. We'll expand the ranch the way I always planned to if I found him. Knox hesitated, then continued with careful deliberation. There'll be plenty of work, plenty of room. Are you offering me continued employment, Mr. Kincaid? Molly asked, her tone light though her heart was racing. No, his grip on her hand tightened. I'm offering you a home, Molly, for you and Eliza. Not as my housekeeper, but as my wife if you'll have me. The directness of his proposal took her breath away, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Knox Kincaid had never been a man to speak in circles or hide his intentions. Knox, she began, her voice unsteady, are you certain? We've only known each other a few months. I've been certain since the night you told me about your father being a professor and your voice got that proud, fierce sound. He brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I've been certain since I watched you hang laundry and hum to yourself when you thought no one was listening. I've been certain since I saw how you love your sister the same way I tried to love mine. Tears pricked at Molly's eyes as Knox continued, his voice growing more confident with each word. I didn't plan on falling in love with you, Molly Walker. But I did. I love your strength and your kindness. I love how you've turned this empty house into a home. I love that you gave me and Eliza a chance when most women would have run the other direction. I love you too, she whispered, the words she'd held back for weeks finally finding voice. I've loved you since you stood up for us at the saloon, since you showed Eliza how to collect eggs without frightening the hens. Since you carved her that little wooden horse and thought I didn't notice you leaving it by her bedside." Knox's face transformed with joy, years seeming to fall away as he pulled her gently into his arms. "Is that a yes, then?" "It's a yes," Molly confirmed, reaching up to touch his face. "For both of us. Eliza already thinks you hung the moon and stars." "Then I'm the luckiest man in Colorado territory," Knox murmured, lowering his head to claim her lips in a kiss that held all the promise of their future, a future that had seemed impossible just months ago, when she'd stood alone on the Silver Creek platform with her sister clinging to her skirts. The orphaned girls had found not just shelter but love at the Broken Spur. And Knox Kincaid, who had lost one family only to build another, finally had everything he'd been searching for. When they announced their engagement at the Thanksgiving social 2 weeks later, no one in Silver Creek seemed surprised. Mrs. Grigsby sniffed disapprovingly, but Judge Wilson was among the first to offer congratulations, along with an offer to perform the ceremony himself. They were married on Christmas Eve in the ranch house, with Daniel standing as best man and Eliza proudly serving as Molly's attendant. As they exchanged vows before the fireplace, snow falling gently outside the windows, Molly thought of how far they had come from that desperate day at the Silver Creek saloon. "You both belong with me now," Knox had said that night, though not in so many words. And he had been right, they did belong with him, this good, strong man who had seen two lost souls and opened his heart to them without hesitation. As Knox sealed their vows with a kiss, Molly knew with absolute certainty that they had all found exactly where they belonged.